You are standing on a beach. In front of you, there is water, and on the other side of that water, there is food. Maybe an island full of birds that have never seen a predator. Maybe a river teeming with fish you can see from shore. Maybe the coastline curves around a headland and you know there is a sheltered bay on the other side, a better camp, a safer place for your family. The food is right there. You can see it, but you cannot reach it because between you and everything you need is a body of water that will kill you if you try to walk through it. You cannot swim far enough, you cannot hold your breath long enough, you are a land animal standing at the edge of a problem that your legs, the single greatest locomotion system evolution ever produced, simply cannot solve. And then one day, you watched a log float. That sounds too simple to matter. It is not. Because someone, somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, possibly hundreds of thousands of years ago, looked at a piece of dead wood drifting on the current and made a connection that changed the future of the entire human species. That thing floats. I do not float. What if I held on to that thing? What if I sat on it? What if I put my child on it and pushed? That leap from observing a physical property to exploiting it is the quiet beginning of every ship, every navy, every trade route, every colonial empire, every transoceanic migration, and every container vessel currently hauling goods across the Pacific tonight. So how did we go from clinging to a log to crossing an ocean? The answer is longer than you'd expect, and it starts before our species even existed. Here's a fact that should stop you. On the Indonesian island of Flores, archaeologists have found stone tools dating back roughly 1 million years. These tools were not made by Homo sapiens. They were made by Homo erectus, or a closely related species, a hominin that walked upright, used fire, but had a brain about 2/3 the size of yours. And Flores has never been connected to the Asian mainland. Not during any ice age, not during any period of low sea level in the last several million years. Deep water channels, part of what biogeographers call the Wallace Line, have separated Flores from the nearest landmass for as long as hominins have existed. The minimum crossing was at least 12 kilometers of open ocean. Now think about what that means for the invention of boats. 1 million years ago, a species of human that predates us by hundreds of thousands of years somehow crossed open water to reach an island. We do not know how. We will probably never find their vessel because wood and reed and bamboo do not survive 1 million years in tropical soil. But they got there. The stone tools prove it. The fossils prove it. Excavations at Matamenge on Flores, led by researchers including Gerrit Vandenberg, uncovered a jawbone fragment and teeth dating to roughly 700,000 years ago, belonging to what would eventually be classified as Homo floresiensis, the species the press called the Hobbit. Those small-bodied humans were already on the island, which means their ancestors had already crossed the water. So when you ask, how did humans invent boats, the answer might begin before humans, as we define them, even existed. And whatever those early hominins used, whether it was a drifting log, a tangle of bamboo lashed together, or a raft they deliberately constructed, it worked well enough to carry a breeding population across 12 kilometers of current-swept ocean. That is the beginning. Not elegant, not engineered, just a primate solving a problem with whatever was at hand, in exactly the same way our lineage has always solved problems. See what works, repeat it, make it better. Now, the archaeological record for early watercraft has a massive hole in it, and the reason is simple. Boats rot. A stone hand axe can survive 1 million years in sediment. A wooden raft cannot survive 1,000. Everything we know about the earliest boats comes from indirect evidence. The fact that humans showed up in places they could only have reached by water. And the single most dramatic example of that evidence is Australia. Roughly 65,000 years ago, modern humans arrived on the continent we now call Australia. We know this from excavations at a site called Madjed Bebe, a rock shelter in Arnhem Land in the Northern Territory, where archaeologist Chris Clarkson and his team unearthed over 10,000 artifacts in the deepest layer, including stone tools, ground ochre, and the oldest known edge-ground hatchets anywhere on Earth. They published their findings in Nature in 2017, and the dates pushed human arrival in Australia back by roughly 18,000 years compared to previous estimates. Here is why this matters for the story of boats. Australia, even during the lowest sea levels of the ice ages, was never connected to Southeast Asia by a land bridge. The ancient landmass of Sahul, which included Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania, was separated from Sunda, the Southeast Asian continental shelf, by at least 60 to 90 kilometers of open ocean, depending on the route. There was no walking to Australia. There was no swimming to Australia. Every single human being who has ever lived on that continent is descended from people who got there by boat. 65,000 years ago. No metal, no sails, no navigation instruments, no written language. And they crossed open ocean, almost certainly on purpose, because modeling by archaeologist Sue O'Connor and others has shown that the crossings would have required island hopping through the Wallacean archipelago, a process demanding multiple separate ocean voyages, each one planned, each one provisioned, each one requiring a vessel capable of carrying not just a handful of adventurers, but enough people to establish a viable population on the other side. This was not a lucky accident. This was organized maritime migration 65,000 years before anyone would think to write anything down. And we have nothing left of the boats they used. Not a plank, not a rope, not a single fragment. The oldest boats we can actually hold in our hands are much, much younger. The oldest surviving boat in the world is the Pesse canoe. It was found in 1955 in the Netherlands near the village of Pesse during the construction of a motorway. A construction worker pulled it out of the peat, and it was nearly thrown away, nearly discarded as a useless log. A local farmer named Hendrik Wanders recognized it for what it was and had it saved. Carbon dating placed its construction between roughly 8040 and 7510 BCE, making it approximately 10,000 years old. It is a dugout canoe carved from a single Scots pine log, about 3 meters long and 44 centimeters wide. Not big, not impressive looking. Honestly, if you saw it in a museum without the placard, you might walk right past it. But someone, 10,000 years ago, in the marshy, post-glacial wetlands of what is now the Netherlands, took a pine tree, chopped it down with stone tools, and then spent hours, probably days, hollowing out the interior with flint and antler, shaping the hull, thinning the walls. They did this because the flooded ground around them was useless without a boat. The boat was not a luxury, it was infrastructure. Without it, you could not fish, you could not travel, you could not live in the environment that existed after the ice melted. The Pesse canoe is sitting in the Drents Museum in Assen today, and it is the oldest physical proof that humans were not just clinging to logs, they were engineering vessels. Now the Pesse canoe is a dugout, and the dugout canoe is worth understanding in detail, because it dominated human boat building for thousands of years across nearly every continent, and the technique for making one without metal tools is genuinely ingenious. You start with a tree, a big one, straight-grained, minimal knots. You need to fell it, and you do not have a steel axe. So you build a fire at the base of the trunk, not a bonfire. A controlled, small fire, managed carefully, with clay or wet mud packed around the trunk to keep the flames from spreading where you don't want them. You burn through the base. The tree falls. Then you set controlled fires along the top surface of the log, charring the wood deliberately, because charred wood is soft and brittle and can be scraped away with stone tools, shells, or sharpened bone far more easily than raw hardwood. Burn a little, scrape it out. Burn a little more, scrape it out. Repeat this process for days. What you end up with is a hull, thin-walled, lightweight, and watertight. A vessel that can carry a family, a catch of fish, or trade goods across a lake, down a river, or along a coast. That fire and scrape technique was used independently by cultures on every inhabited continent. People in North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Pacific Islands all figured out the same basic method without ever communicating with each other. The dugout is a convergent invention, the same way that I evolved independently in dozens of separate lineages. The physics of floating wood and the problem of hollowing it out led everyone to roughly the same solution because there are only so many ways to solve that particular problem with the materials available. But the dugout has a limitation. You are constrained by the size of the tree. Your boat can only be as wide as the trunk and as long as the log. If you want something bigger, you need a different idea entirely. And the first big conceptual leap beyond the dugout was the idea that you could build a boat from pieces. Not carve a single object, but assemble multiple components into a structure that was greater than the sum of its parts. Planks. Separate flat pieces of wood, shaped and fitted together, edge to form a hull that no single tree could have provided. The earliest evidence of this technique shows up in ancient Egypt, and the Egyptians had a very specific reason for figuring it out. They had a river, the Nile, that was essentially the highway of their entire civilization, but they did not have large, straight-grained timber. Egypt is not exactly covered in forests. Their native wood, primarily acacia, grows short and twisted, nothing like the tall pines and oaks available in northern Europe. So Egyptian shipwrights learned to take short, irregular planks of acacia and fit them together like a jigsaw puzzle, joining them edge to edge using a combination of internal lashing channels and mortise and tenon joints, creating hulls that no single piece of Egyptian wood could have formed alone. The most spectacular example of early Egyptian boat building is the Khufu ship. Discovered in 1954 in a sealed limestone pit at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza, it dates to approximately 2500 BCE, and it is one of the largest and best preserved ancient vessels in the world. Over 43 meters long, about 142 feet, built from Lebanese cedar, a timber the Egyptians imported specifically because they did not have trees that size at home. And here's the detail that should make you sit up. The Khufu ship was found disassembled. 1,224 individual pieces carefully arranged in 13 layers inside the pit, with the ropes still bundled alongside them. It was a knockdown kit. A flat pack boat, buried 4,500 years ago, designed to be reassembled in the afterlife for the pharaoh's journey across the celestial waters. IKEA, but for the dead. The ship was sewn together with ropes, not nailed. The planks had internal channels carved through them, and vegetable fiber ropes were threaded through these channels to pull the planks tightly together. When the ropes got wet, they swelled, making the joints even tighter. The whole thing was designed to become more watertight the longer it sat in water. And the hull was built shell first, meaning the outer shell of planks was assembled first, and the internal framing was added afterward. A building philosophy opposite to the skeleton-first method that most modern shipbuilding uses. This is not a rough raft. This is precision woodworking at a scale that would challenge a modern carpenter with power tools. Now, the Egyptians were building on rivers and coastal waters. They had another innovation that changed the equation entirely: the sail. The earliest depictions of sails appear on Egyptian pottery and rock art dating to at least 3,500 BCE. And the Nile gave the Egyptians a beautiful natural laboratory for sailing, because the river flows north while the prevailing winds blow south. You could float downstream with the current and sail upstream with the wind. Two-way travel on a single river using two different natural forces. Think about what the sail represents in the story of boat invention. Every boat before the sail was powered by muscle. You paddled, you rowed, you poled. Your body was the engine, the same way your arm was the engine for a thrown spear. The sail captures wind. It converts a natural force into directed motion. That is not just a better way to move a boat. That is a fundamentally different category of technology. The boat went from being a tool you powered to a machine that harvested energy from the environment. And that shift, from muscle power to wind power, is one of the most important transitions in the history of human technology, right alongside the controlled use of fire and the invention of the wheel. And then, on the other side of the world, a completely different group of people took the boat in a direction that the Egyptians, for all their engineering sophistication, never attempted. They went to sea, not along the coast, not across a river, into the open Pacific Ocean. Around 3000 BCE, a population living on the island of Taiwan began one of the most extraordinary migrations in human history. Over the next several thousand years, their descendants, the Austronesian peoples, would spread across the largest geographical area ever colonized by a pre-industrial civilization, from Taiwan to the Philippines, from the Philippines to Indonesia, Melanesia, Micronesia, and eventually all the way to Madagascar in the west and the furthest reaches of Polynesia in the east, Hawaii, Easter Island, New Zealand. An expansion covering nearly a third of the Earth's surface across the largest ocean on the planet, accomplished entirely in boats. And the boat that made it possible was the outrigger canoe. The outrigger solved the single biggest problem of open ocean sailing: stability. A narrow canoe is fast and hydrodynamically efficient, but it capsizes easily. A wide canoe is stable, but slow and heavy. The Austronesians figured out a third option: attach a lateral float, called an aimant, to the main hull using crossbeams, and you get a vessel that is narrow enough to cut through waves at speed, but stable enough to carry families, livestock, seeds, and fresh water across thousands of kilometers of open ocean. Some cultures developed double-hulled versions, catamarans, that could carry even more. These were not fragile coastal craft. These were blue-water sailing vessels, built using lashed lug construction that allowed the hulls to flex with the waves rather than fighting them. The same engineering principle the Vikings would independently arrive at several thousand years later on the other side of the planet. And the Austronesians did not sail blindly. Polynesian navigators, the descendants of those original Austronesian voyagers, developed a wayfinding system so sophisticated that it has no equivalent anywhere else in human history. They navigated using a mental construct called a star compass, memorizing the rising and setting positions of hundreds of stars across the horizon. They read ocean swells, detecting the way distant islands deflected wave patterns hundreds of kilometers away. They watched for specific bird species that nested on land and flew out to sea to feed in the predictable patterns. They observed the color and shape of clouds, which formed differently over land than over open water. This knowledge was not written down. It was oral, passed from master navigator to apprentice across generations, stored entirely in human memory. By the 1970s, this tradition had nearly been wiped out by colonization and westernization. In 1976, the Polynesian Voyaging Society built a traditional double-hulled canoe called hokulea and sailed it from Hawaii to Tahiti, a distance of roughly 4,000 kilometers using no instruments at all. The navigator was Mau Piai Lug, a master wayfinder from the tiny Micronesian island of Satawal, one of the last people alive who still practiced the ancient art. He guided the vessel for 31 days using only the stars, the swells, and the flight patterns of birds. Think about what that means. A living human being in 1976 navigated across 4,000 kilometers of open ocean using the same techniques that brought his ancestors across the Pacific thousands of years before him. The boats had been refined. The knowledge had been transmitted. The principle had survived. Now, back in the Mediterranean, boats were evolving along a completely different line, and the civilization that pushed shipbuilding furthest, fastest, was the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians lived along the coast of modern-day Lebanon, starting around 1500 BCE, and they had two things going for them. First, they were sitting on some of the best shipbuilding timber in the ancient world, the legendary cedars of Lebanon, tall, straight-grained, and rot-resistant. Second, they were wedged between much larger empires, Egypt to the south and Mesopotamia to the east, with no room to expand on land. Their future, if they were going to have one, was on the water. So they built the best ships anyone had ever seen, and their critical innovation was the locked mortise and tenon joint. Here's how it works. You cut a rectangular socket, a mortise, into the edge of one plank. You cut a matching socket into the edge of the adjacent plank. Then you insert a precisely shaped tongue of wood, a tenon, into both sockets simultaneously, locking the two planks together. Then you drill a hole through the joint and hammer in a wooden dowel to lock the tenon in place permanently. The result is a hull where every plank is structurally interlocked with its neighbors, creating a watertight shell of extraordinary strength. The Romans later called this technique coagmenta punicana, Punic joinery, and adopted it wholesale. The Phoenicians also developed something that would change the geometry of sailing forever: a true structural keel. Earlier boats had flat bottoms or simple keelson beams. The Phoenician keel ran the full length of the ship like a spine, providing the structural backbone for the entire vessel and, more importantly, giving the hull lateral resistance against the force of the wind. Without a keel, a sailing vessel slides sideways through the water. With one, it tracks forward. The keel is the reason boats can sail into the wind instead of only running before it. And the Phoenicians used that capability to trade across the entire Mediterranean, reaching as far as the Atlantic coast of Africa and possibly Britain, carrying cedar, purple dye, glass, and metal from port to port, building the first true maritime trade network in Western history. They also invented the bireme, a warship with 2 banks of oars, doubling the rowing power without doubling the ship's length. Some historians credit them with developing the trireme as well, the 3-banked warship that the Greeks would later make famous at the Battle of Salamis in 480 BCE. Whether they invented it outright or simply pioneered the concept that the Greeks refined, the Phoenicians pushed the boundary of what a boat could be, from a vehicle that moved people across water to a weapon that could project military force across an ocean. And then there are the Vikings,